Okay, CGA 103 students, this next lecture is on the characteristics of fonts, which is another important skill that we need to get you to understand as this is a foundation class. So designers, type designers create fonts in a different way, and they're divided into different categories. And we're going to go over each of the categories so you can be able to pick out each of the categories or each of the fonts so you can identify what it is. The last quiz number 4, is going to be all about identifying fonts in addition to understanding the characteristics of them. So the first type of font is called a serif. The term serif means curls or curves. So when you look at a type that has these little tiny curves at the end of them, that is what we call a serif. Serifs are highly readable and they're good for paragraphs of type. So here's some examples, and you'll notice that they all have different serifs. We're going to talk about sans serifs in a second, but notice the little swashes at the end of each of the typefaces, the letters, those little decorative pieces. These are the serifs that we see. So here's another example, and even though this is kind of a chunky font, it still has the little swashes on each of the ends of the characters. Here are some popular serif fonts that you probably have installed on your computer. Alright, so the next type of font is sans serif. And sans serif means it does not have a little stroke at the end. The term sans serif, serif in French means curls or curves, and the word sans means without. So sans serif means without any swashes or curls at the end. So in this example here, this is the sans serif. There's no little swashes. So when we look at this, is the serif font. See how this has got the actual little decorative items here? This does not. All right. So here's another example. It's very straight up and down, very angular. Okay, it can be skinny. So again, it does not have any, at the end of the characters, does not have any curls or swirls at the end. Here are some popular sans serif fonts that you probably have seen or have on your computer. Alright, the next type of font that we have is, in terms of identifying, is something called a slab. And slab basically means thick or block-like. And slab can be also referred to as black or thick in terms of its characteristics. So we also applied the term slab to serif and sans serif. So a type can be slab serif or slab sans serif. You wouldn't just refer to a type or font as just slab. It has to be either slab serif or slab sans serif. And basically think of a slab serif as basically thick or block-like. And they're fairly heavy in terms of typefaces. We see a lot of slab fonts being used for headlines, billboards, website ads. They basically are bold and almost scream at the user, saying, "Hey, I'm here." So here's some examples of some slab fonts. This one would be a slab serif because it's got the little curls at the end. This one, again, is a slab serif. It's got the curls at the end, but it's very, very thick. All right, so this is a slab serif. It's very thick. All right. So when you're looking at a font, you first are going to identify it whether it's a slab or a serif or a sans serif, and then you're going to decide, is it thick enough to warrant the slab designation. So here's some. This is a slab serif. This is a slab sans serif. The next designation we put on type is thin or condensed. And again, these are going to be applied to serif and sans serif fonts. So a thin font was very, very thin in their width, and condensed basically looks like it's been pushed together or smushed together. So let's see some examples. So here's an example of a thin font. Now this is a thin sans serif font. It's very, very thin. Just zoom in a little bit more. It's very, very thin. There's no serifs in it, so this would be a thin sans serif face. This one down here has the little swashes at the end, so this would be considered a thin sans serif typeface. Alright, so condensed is basically going to mean that the type looks like it's been smushed together. So you can see how these letters look like they've been kind of smushed together in almost like a silly putty manner. Same thing that this one actually looks like it's been pushed together. And notice that there's very little spacing between the letters, also known as tracking. The next category of fonts that we have is called fancy or decorative. And these are really highly stylized, and they're often hard to read. So they're generally used for very small blocks of type or headlines. So let's take some examples of this. Again, highly stylized. They can be sans serif or serif, but they're highly stylized. And when we see some examples, you're going to say, "Oh, I see where it's stylized," and it definitely crosses into decorative. So here we have an example. This obviously is a serif typeface, but because of the intricate letters with the little decorative elements to it, this crosses into decorative. So yes, is it a serif font? Yes, but it crosses then into the decorative. Same thing with this. This one with all the lines it's a sans serif font, but it actually is highly stylized. Same thing with this one and this one, and then we have some examples over here. Out of all the typefaces to select and to identify, the decorative or fancy ones sometimes can be hard. So for example, this one where the happy, that's a sans serif font, but it's really stylized, so that would be cross over into a decorative or fancy font. Some popular decorative or fancy fonts are listed here. You'll see some on your computer. The next category of font is called script fonts. And script fonts basically look like handwriting or calligraphy. So it's mocking the handwriting of signatures or calligraphy. So here are some examples. Obviously this looks very, very much like someone wrote it. Now you might say, well, why isn't this decorative or fancy? Well, because it looks like someone hand wrote this. Same thing with over here with this font. It looks like someone wrote it, with beautiful penmanship. So it's either calligraphy or stylized with terms of writing. So the difference between a fancy or decorative font versus a script font is a script font looks like it was handwritten, either by a calligrapher or someone with really nice penmanship. Oops, let me go back to that. So here's some popular script fonts that you might have on your computer, and we're going to do an example of this as well. All right, last but certainly not least, we have iconic fonts. So iconic fonts are actually not letter formations. Instead of letters, we're going to see icons or symbols. And we're going to get this again from the glyph panel, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit in another exercise. So we use icons for, excuse my telephone, for symbols and icons as opposed to letters. All right, so let's see some examples. So here's an example of some iconic fonts. So instead of seeing letter formations, we're going to see symbols. So in this case, this is where we get, the universal handicap symbol, arrows, different symbols. Here we've got different arrows. And I'm going to show you that in the future, in a future hands-on activity that we're going to do. Here's some popular fonts that you might see in icons. So Webdings and the Wingdings probably you have on your computer, and some of these other ones you also might have. All right, so that's the lecture on font characteristics, and we're going to do a couple exercises, another lecture and some exercises on picking the different fonts.